See, I think we are live. Hello, everyone. This is, I don't even need these. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay. Um, this is Jason Bosch. I did this. This is kind of an impromptu live stream. It looks like we have 6 people watching. Um, so I just came up with this idea the other night. It's Denver has a pretty large Martin Luther King Day parade. They call it the Marade. The Marade. um, and I've been going to this thing for many years, and it's always kind of a little bit gross because it's like all these politicians and corporations are out there shilling their thing, which to me it felt like it had nothing to do with Martin Luther King. It was just basically taking advantage of the sentiment that people have towards Martin Luther King. So I actually have filmed over the years. I filmed little clips here and there from the event. And so I thought I would just share with you guys some of these clips and maybe have a conversation. If you guys want to make any comments or anything on the chat or whatever, maybe we can have a discussion about this. But I've noticed how there's efforts to co-opt different images of different people. Martin Luther King's a real big one. And yeah, so I'll just start by showing, this is from 2011. Some stuff that I filmed in Denver in 2011. So let's do this. We'll start with this and then we'll talk about it.
I think Martin Luther King's legacy is something that we all live with every day. I think this is an opportunity to really honor his accomplishments and the accomplishments of that movement. It's easy, I think, to kind of live day to day and not acknowledge and not really appreciate the accomplishments of the civil rights movement. Obviously a lot has been accomplished, and we live in a world that has been really affected by the civil rights movement. And this is our opportunity every year to kind of honor not only Martin Luther King, but just the movement in general, everybody who contributed to it in ways where they became famous for, or folks just everyday folks who contributed to the movement. Martin Luther King's image, I think, is largely constructed to be this thing that is not threatening to the powers that be. But obviously, towards the end of his life, Martin Luther King was becoming a huge threat. He was fighting for things like to end the war, to fight for labor rights, things that were getting a little too sensitive, and we forget that a lot just because he did accomplish a lot with regard to the civil rights movement. We forget the things that he was kind of working on towards the end of his life.
Well, King's legacy cannot be differentiated from the legacy of the oppressed peoples of the United States fighting for freedom. King was simply a spokesperson, a spokesman for the legitimate grievances of people of color and poor and oppressed peoples for justice. So as long as people continue to fight for justice and not let his dream be co-opted by corporations and politicians, then I think his dream can be quite inspirational and courageous. Oh, well, the fact that you can have corporations saying they support his dream when in fact his dream was against corporations, in the sense of rule of the rich over the poor, the fact that politicians will take his dream and manipulate it when in fact he was against politicians taking the grievances of people and abusing them and denying their right to justice, to me seems to have been a very successful campaign by PR firms, corporations, and the military-industrial complex to co-opt his dream. That's what's important. People come out to these demonstrations every year and raise concerns about social justice.
What are your thoughts on the parade?
I mean, it's sponsored by Kaiser, right? Is that PepsiCo's here, and I think any place where they feel comfortable, it's not necessarily something I'm down for, but I'm here because there's a lot of friends out here. When I think about Martin Luther King, the thing I think about most is the.
Okay, looks like I'm having a technical issue here, you guys. Let me figure out what's going on. I think I had made some changes to a previous thing I was doing, output. I changed the output for a recording the other day, and I forgot to change it back. Sorry about that. Output. Okay, this should fix it. Okay, tell me if you guys are seeing the video now. Sorry about that. Luckily, I wasn't picking my nose or anything. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. Thanks for alerting me to that. So we'll.
Letter to a Birmingham, letter from a Birmingham prison. In it, I think he specifically points out the white moderate as like being the biggest obstacle in his struggle, and for civil rights. And I feel like that's something that's carried on today. Like moderate white liberalism, you know, is usually like it co-ops a lot of like really good movements and turns them into like things for political gain. And I mean, obviously we can say as much as we want also about like how that works on the right end of the spectrum. But I think like really looking down, especially at like something like this today, like looking at like ourselves as like being left of center, you know, like what can we improve?
Where his legacy falls in place is still a dream. We have made great strides towards the integration, but we have moved backwards in terms of economic integration. We have a schism that is occurring now in the world between the has and the has not. It was going on during Dr. King's time, but in the last 20 years it has been exacerbated to the place that I'm not sure we're going to have a middle class in the United States of America. We have made the decision, for whatever reason, that we are the policemen of the world. As such, we are engaged in conflicts that we have minimal reason to be in. Each of us view King through our own lens. A person who is involved in a corporation that hires people of color and hire people who are normally excluded may feel that they are living out Dr. King's dream. At the same time, they're involved in parsing the atmosphere. Dr. King did not spend a lot of time talking about those kinds of issues. However, I believe it's very clear that he would be on the side of being a husband to the world as opposed to being a conqueror of the world. So that too is a complicated process. It is not one or the other. Politicians, when they work, when they run on the doctrine of fairness for the most part. Okay, so they're running on the doctrines of fairness, but what is fairness? Fairness is designed. Fairness is something that we look at through our own lens. If you are indeed a person of war, you may think it fair to be involved in a war. So if, all those things, all of us look at Dr. King's legacy through our own lens, and therefore it is probably a distorted legacy.
I think what Dr. King did was excellent. You know, that was just something that was so, I can't give a word for it. It's a shift in the thinking of the United States, America, not just America, but for the world, and how we should treat one another, how people should be treated. I think what he did was tremendous, was wonderful, and it's come a long way, but of course I don't think we've arrived there totally. I think we still do have a ways to go.
One of the things that it seems to be missing from a lot of the discussion about King is the work that he was doing in the last years of his life, particularly with the Poor People's Campaign. And do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, you know, to be honest about it, I didn't really start looking at that until, you know, not too long ago, some years ago, realizing what he was trying to do, because that's very important, you know. Again, equal rights for everybody, not just for those who have, but for the have-nots. And I think, unfortunately, our society, there's that differentiation. Either you have or you have not. And I think that's where you get into, you know, some people feel like they're entitled to do whatever they want to other people because they're not at the same level they are economically, that type of thing. And that's what he was trying to bridge that gap. And I know that was a lot of what he was doing in his latter work. in the latter part of his life. Again, just equality on all fronts, not just racial equality, but just treating people fairly.
Why do you think we don't really hear about that part of his life? Because I remember going through school and I never learned anything about that part of his life until, you know, I learned on my own, you know, as an adult. You know, what are your thoughts on that?
To be honest about it, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it was deliberate. You know, America is a great country to live in, and I love living here. But seemingly, you still see that at different levels of how people feel about each other. You know, if I'm up here, and you're down there, and that type of thing. So I don't know why. You know, I can only guess. You know, even Eisenhower talked about the military industrial complex, and that whole thing to me is, if we have wars, the people who have the money get more money because they put countries in debt because they have to buy arms to fight.
So I'm just going to stop it there for a quick second. So one of the things that many of you know that I'd been involved with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign and worked with Sherry Honkala for many years, and that was inspired by Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign. And you know, I started learning about Martin Luther King the last few years of his life, where he'd given this speech they called it Beyond Vietnam speech, actually on April 4th, 1967 is when he gave that speech. And then he was murdered, like literally to the day, April 4th, 1968, 1 year later. And one of the things about this is he came out against militarism and the war in Vietnam, and he also started to work. He was trying to build a racial intergenerational movement against poverty, and they were organizing this march on Washington that actually went ahead, but he was killed just before it. But I was really fascinated with that, and the fact that a lot of the churches actually really opposed him doing that. Their argument was, hey, we're making progress in civil rights. You don't need to be messing with the Vietnam War and then going into, talking about, economic issues and poverty. And so I was always inspired by that part of him. And I know someone on here said that he's a psyops. I don't agree with that. I think that his image is being used, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about here with this show. Like, whoever he was is not even relevant as much anymore, because his image can be used for different politicians or corporations or all, lots of different people can use his image for whatever they want. And so I was just really interested in that, but I was also interested in the fact that people weren't really familiar with his work around poverty and the work around against the Vietnam War. And so nowadays there's a new Poor People's Campaign, which is actually, sorry to say, a front group that's funded by the Ford Foundation, Reverend Barber, and you'll see Democracy Now! Promoting this group, but unfortunately, they still serve the interests of the banks and the corporations. So anyway, so that's where we're at. Anyways, I just thought I would give that little background there, and that was kind of why I started, going around and interviewing people, asking them kind of what they thought about this. So I'll jump back into it.
Good neighbor. All right.
Okay, I got to jump in. I'm going to show that again because I got to tell you what that was. I missed the very beginning of it, but the speaker was saying, and like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. And half the audience was like, State Farm is there. And it was just like, and that yelling, that was me going, no. So I'll play that again. But yeah, there's all these corporations there and these politicians, and it's gross. It's seriously gross. But I'll play that again because it's kind of funny.
$1 bottle of water. Good neighbor. All right.
That was me.
What I love about Kaiser, we're living in this healthcare environment.
Pimpin' Kaiser.
They don't only want to insure you to make sure you come for urgent care, but they want to make sure that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that's what Kaiser represents here. It is obvious
1, 2, 3.
So here's another thing. There's a lot of militarism at the Martin Luther King Day parade. You have the veterans of foreign wars. They have these young. This group is called the Young Marines, and I'm thinking, you know, Martin Luther King was very much opposed to militarism, and to have a parade about Martin Luther King that has a lot of militarism, like leading it. Like a lot of these groups are right up front there. I thought was pretty sad. Anyways, I interviewed this guy with this group here, the Young Marines. Again, this is 2011, but every year you can go. I didn't go today. Today they had the parade, but I didn't go today. But they always have lots of a heavy presence of militaristic, particularly youth.
Keep it going, Young Marines, you're on camera. Yes, sir.
What's your name?
My name is Sean Michael. I'm a staff volunteer.
Okay. And what do you feel about Martin Luther King's legacy and how it relates to the Marines?
I'd rather not say. It's a political discussion that I cannot get into at this point.
And so you guys just came out here to represent the...
We're here to represent the veterans and support the veterans as it pertains to Martin Luther King celebration. This is a worldwide organization. If you go to youngmarines.com, you'll see get all the information you can. The Young Marines teach leadership, discipline, and responsibility, and above all, they teach kids to stay off drugs. That's the core value of the Young Marines: drug demand reduction.
So it's not about promoting militarism; it's about keeping kids off of drugs. This is absurd.
And how does that relate to the military?
It doesn't. This is not, I repeat, not a precursor to the military. We do not train these kids to go into the military. The uniforms are there to signify unity and dedication to the unit and to the values of the Young Marines.
Where we going?
So these kids are from Montbello High, which is in one of the more poorer areas in Denver. So.
Formation!
So that was just some clips that I took in 2011, and yeah. So next up, I'm going to show you guys. Yeah, ROTC. Samuel's talking about ROTC. Yeah, I mean it's totally, even like the color guard, and there's different things that really are clearly about grooming kids into military life and military mentality. But no, according to this Young Marines guy, it's called the Young Marines, but it's not about grooming kids for the military. I was just stunned at that interview. Like, I'm like, really, dude? Come on. So next up, so this video has a hair on the. It was on my sensor, and so there's the video is a little not the best quality. I didn't really have time to clean it up because I just kind of did this impromptu. But this next clip is my friend Phil Goodstein. He's actually a Denver historian, and I've been filming a lot of stuff with him over the years, and he's written 27 books about the history of Denver. And so I was out there with him, and this was actually filmed in 2019, where he talks a little bit about the history of Martin Luther King Day and the parade in Denver. So that's this next clip. And sorry for the bad video.
Well, actually, some members of the Black Panthers back in the 1970s, I want to say a guy named Virgil Williams was in the forefront of it, were deciding that it was necessary to go and celebrate Martin Luther King as a rebel of this. And they started having various marches, parades to mark Martin Luther King's birthday, and that was considered a subversive revolutionary effort. And for some years, the Denver Police Department actually would crack down on Virgil Williams and the few others that dared to go out and parade on Martin Luther King Day. But meanwhile, as Martin Luther King moulders in his grave, he starts increasingly becoming an icon, particularly with the end of the Vietnam War. A lot of the black establishment, particularly the black military establishment, was appalled by Martin Luther King for his opposition not just to the Vietnam War, but his increasing denunciations of militarism and the violence associated with the State Department and the Pentagon. So they were rather shy and hesitant about embracing Martin Luther King for some years. Indeed, you look at the cult of Denver today, there's a lot about the Tuskegee Airmen, the men that landed up going and flying for Uncle Sam in World War II. Just across the street from us is a car that says the American Legion Wallace Simpson Post on that's going to be leading the parade today. And what happens on this is Wallace Simpson is a black sailor from Denver who is the first black serviceman from the Mile High City killed in World War I. Then the American Legion starts forming in the wake of World War I as a legion against Bolshevism, as a legion for a very intolerant Americanism, which is basically total support of the status quo. And before long, there's a lot of problems with the American Legion, particularly when black servicemen want to join the American Legion. So led by a professional patriot, Rice Means, the black community works with the white American Legion to form a Jim Crow chapter in town. That's the origins of the Wallace Simpson Post. Incidentally, the man that put together the deal for this, Rice Means, goes on to be a leader of the Ku Klux Klan and is actually elected United States Senator from Colorado in 1924 as an outright member of the Ku Klux Klan. But that's a different story. Meanwhile, you end up having Martin Luther King dead, and increasingly there's this idea that we have to celebrate him. And over the years, America has celebrated different people from different cultures, particularly in the early 20th century, as a sign that they were indeed equal American citizens. Members of the middle-class Italian community landed up getting Colorado to be the first state in the Union in 1907 to go and make Columbus Day an official state holiday out of this. So increasingly the idea is growing that a Martin Luther King holiday would be a sign of recognition, a sign of success. And it's sort of indicative of who lands up going and is the key figure in creating the Colorado Martin Luther King Day holiday, and that is Wilma Webb. Wilma Webb sometimes known as Denver's First Lady, the wife of Wellington Webb, who succeeds him in the state legislature when he becomes part of the Richard Lamb administration, is sort of this personification of, yes, blacks have succeeded, they have made it, they have been successes, that they can serve the system just as much as any whites can for the occasion. And though the Democrats are in a minority in the legislature during virtually all of her service, she lands up learning parliamentary tricks, and it gets a lot of pressure to get the state holiday going. And by this time, increasingly, we can't allow the Black Panthers, a group that has been both romanticized and virtually totally written out of Denver's history, to claim the legacy of Martin Luther King and a parade in his name. So you start getting from above, again led by Wilma Webb, Wellington Webb, other leaders of the black community, the Black Service Veterans Associations, start going and transforming Martin Luther King Day into something, an official celebration, almost a virtual holy day along the way of that there. And in the process, definitions of black success have tended more to be which particular politicians have succeeded, which black business people have landed up flourishing, rather than the lot of the community as a whole. As opposed to all of this, you land up having a lot of rank and file members of the black community, of the white community, of numerous other groups are saying, no, Martin Luther King is our hero. He was the rebel. He was the guy that launched the Poor People's Campaign. He was the guy that said no to the Vietnam War and militarism. And actually, I would argue that probably about at least half, if not a considerable majority, of the people that turn out and march at the Martin Luther King parade land up going and embracing that legacy. But again, you have the veterans groups, the politicians, all dominating the affair of sort of the schizophrenic legacy associated with Martin Luther King in Denver. Now they're drumming me out of the place here. Well, no, it's quite interesting is, again, this schizophrenic quality of that. Like the guy that's been the Grand Marshal of the Denver Martin Luther King Parade for years, Vern Howard, is an illustrative of these views of this. For one time, he was a Denver Park employee. In fact, at one time, he landed up being the manager of City Park. On the side, he's a bus driver out of that. Another of his avocations is being a historian of Black Denver, filled with stories. And on the one hand, he will be among the people that will be very outspoken about the racism, the hypocrisy, the double dealing within the entire civil rights movement. He also is the loyalist that is out there praising the types such as Elvin Caldwell, Omar Blair, for whom you have the Blair Caldwell Library, something of a shrine of middle-class Wellington Webb Denver for the situation out of that. Or actually, that would be a good shot as we go down towards the statue itself, where you can sort of see the crowd. Or again, here is Martin Luther King of the Poor People's March. Martin Luther King, who would have mule trains on occasion to show the real legacy of the blacks. And here you have a set of limousines being in the vanguard of the Martin Luther King Day parade. Now, see, I think that's very indicative. They just introduced Jared Polis, and he introduced John Hickenlooper with the most tepid of cheers, as opposed to the official, let's celebrate the Democrats of the Black Democratic establishment.
So Jared, I'll just say Jared Polis is really pushing hard. This ties in with the work that Allison does, really pushing hard to make Colorado the first, there's a competition who's going to be the first digital state. But, we now in Colorado, we have digital driver's license. You can get your driver's license digitally. And there's a big push in Colorado to us becoming a digital state. So that's just a little aside there. But Jared Polis made his fortune in tech. And he's our governor, and he's also been real heavy in pushing mandates.
Indicative of Colorado and Denver's celebration of Martin Luther King is back in the mid-1970s, Denver is among the very, very first cities in the country to actually have a Martin Luther King statue. And this was the doing of a black city councilman, Bill Roberts. And of course, political considerations are everything in deciding where the statue should be in City Park and who should design it. And among the people that land up coming to Denver to unveil the Martin Luther King statue is Loretta Scott King, the widow of Martin Luther King. And she sees the statue and she is appalled that it is the ugliest thing, the biggest caricature that she could have imagined. Critics are calling it something out of the Planet of the Apes on this. The money for the statue is missing. And then one day a tour bus is going by and the driver is saying, and then on your left is the statue of, whoops, and there's no statue there. And basically there were threats by the people that cast it, that installed it, that if they weren't paid, they were going to come in and remove it, only to discover that the city councilman, Bill Roberts, had authorized a removal of the statue because he claimed it wasn't installed properly of this, and of course city money lands up being appropriated to pay it off. Among the people that was never happy about the Martin Luther King statue was Wellington Webb. Among his various efforts while he is mayor is not only a grandiose office building celebrating himself, but he wanted a distinguished new Martin Luther King statue. So in 2002, he hires a first-class sculptor, not only to have Martin Luther King, but to have Rosa Parks, other dignitaries of the civil rights movement, and again, in a virtual rite of worship, they land up installing the new statue. And typical of the way Pueblo has always been something of the armpit, the dump of the rest of Colorado, they sent the original Martin Luther King statue down to Pueblo, where it's on display these days.
So before you were talking about the Grand Marshal when people were drumming, I'd like to get that again. You want to talk a little bit about who the Grand Marshal is?
Okay, I think he's still around as Vern Howard. And Vern Howard over the years has had an amazing career. He's a Denver boy, goes to Smiley Junior High School, goes to work for the Parks Department. At one time, he's a senior figure within the Denver Parks Department. He's the manager of City Park among his various ventures. On the side, he's a bus driver, he has a tour company, he's a tour guide, and he's among the people that lands up going and emerging as a key figure in pushing and promoting the Martin Luther King Day Parade. And over the years, he's actually personally contributed a good deal of funds to keep the parade operating and going. And he's again typical. He is a self-avowed historian of Black Denver, has all sorts of great stories, insider tales about the community of that. For years he's been promising he's going to write the book on Black Denver itself. And even while he says this, he's also a loyalist who is out there, who will praise people like Omar Blair, Elvin Caldwell, the key people for whom the Blair Caldwell Library is named, another Wellington Webb monument to sort of the official middle-class success version of Black Denver.
What do you think about like the relationship between what Martin Luther King did with his life and what he was preaching versus all this?
Well, that's actually been a challenge of the civil rights movement through the 20th century. But okay, the challenge of the civil rights movement has always been exactly what is its goal. Is it simply legal equality within the status quo of white, racist, capitalist America, or is it a black republic, black independence, or is it a socialist transformation of society? And over the years, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that was partially formed with the help of middle-class social democrats of this, was sort of always preaching that opinion that no, all we really want is that middle-class equality idea. Another of the founders of the NAACP is W.E.B. Du Bois, who is the editor of its official magazine, the foremost black scholar of Black America, of slavery, of Reconstruction in the early first half of the 20th century. Eventually, he's a member of the Communist Party who leaves the United States, and sort of typical of his relationship with Martin Luther King is on August 28th, 1963, the date of the March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech. Du Bois dies that day in exile in Africa as sort of just a footnote to this whole new idea that all we want is equality, equal opportunity within the status quo, rather than going and condemning the essence of an unequal, racist, money-driven society.
But it seems like Martin Luther King was changing his tune as in the last few years of his life.
Oh yes, definitely. That was partly what the Poor People's Campaign was all about. And as long as he was campaigning in the South against outright Jim Crow, he's the champion of the northern goody-goody liberals and a lot of conservatives. Actually, the Republican Party in the 1960s did far more than civil rights than the Democratic Party did. This because the Democratic Party at that time is still dominated in Congress by the Dixiecrats, and President Lyndon Johnson actually relies heavily on the Republican minority leader, Everett Dixon, to go and get some of it's Everett Dirksen, get some of the passage of civil rights legislation on this. But then when Martin Luther King lands up going north, he starts seeing the northern poverty, the discrimination, the racism that is in Chicago in particular of this, and he starts going and expanding his views to being a much more comprehensive, that it's not just enough to have the right to vote, but big deal. It's not just enough to have a slave labor job or get wages, but it's dignity, and that the issue of poverty and civil rights are closely interlinked of that, and that was his key plan. He dies leading a picket line down in Memphis at the time of his assassination, right when he is going and pushing for the Poor People's Campaign. And again, a lot of that has tended to just disappear from the middle-class celebration of Martin Luther King.
So, yeah, I have some more clips here, but I thought I would jump in here. It's been fascinating, though, to watch. Everyone from George W. Bush to Obama, wants to put Martin Luther King up on a pedestal and praise him, when I'm pretty sure that if he were alive today, he would not be in support of them. But that's speculation. It's also interesting. One of the other pieces of this that I've been kind of fascinated with is how it seemed like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were starting to kind of come together on some issues, and had both of them been able to live, it would have been interesting to see, you know, what would have come of that, because both of them were dynamic and changing as they went along. But years ago I saw, and I wish I would have gotten a photo of it, but there was a big billboard, a Martin Luther King billboard that was put out by the Republicans, you know, saying Martin Luther King was a Republican, and it doesn't really, like, Republican Democrat, like it doesn't. I've been registered a Republican, but I've never been a Republican. I've been registered as a Democrat, and I've never been a Democrat. But, you know, you have to, whatever. It's just the political shit show. But it's interesting. I mean, he kind of probably was. Some people have called him a social democrat, which is probably pretty accurate in terms of some of the policies that he was pushing. But he was registered Republican, so Republicans want to take credit for him. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to do here, is just to have, you know, start some of these conversations. So here's a couple more interviews that I did that same day in 2019, and it's so weird. 2019, it feels like it was more than a decade ago, even though it was only a couple of years ago. So much has changed.
So hi, what is your name?
My name is Vivian Elliott.
Okay, and where are we at here today?
Where are we at?
Yeah,
we
where
are
are we at? What's going on today?
At the Parade, the Martin Luther King Gathering in Denver, Colorado.
Okay. And have you been to this before?
Oh yes, I've been here for 40 years, and I've made as many marches as I can.
Okay. So I'm doing something a little bit different today. I'm interested in Martin Luther King's legacy versus, you know, who he was as a person and what he stood for. Particularly, like, I noticed that, like, a lot of people are, you know, it seems like they promote the civil rights piece of it, which is great. We should do that. But it seems like a lot of, like, what he was doing in the latter years of his life, the Poor People's Campaign, it seems to be like a lot of the politicians, a lot of people don't want to talk about that part of his life. What do you think about that?
I think that in his latter years, he took a strong stand against institutional racism, classism, economic deprivation, how the isms separated people and marginalized certain groups of people. Heterosexism was part of it, and
so she says heterosexism was part of it, and maybe anybody who's watching this can share any information that goes into that. Again, I think that's another co-optation that's going on there, because I don't remember Martin Luther King ever having any stance around heterosexism. I don't really know what she's referring to there, but I thought that was an interesting comment by her.
Going against privilege and separation that created underclass people. I think he was moving toward confronting policies and practices and structures and institutional kinds of political stands that separated people.
So have you seen in your lifetime any people using his image, or companies or politicians that you feel like maybe he wouldn't necessarily agree with how his image is used for, you know, maybe by people that didn't necessarily align with what he stood for? Have you ever seen any of that?
I think his picture shows up as a good American, an ideal American who was there for all people. And if we're not careful, that camouflages the reality of his political stands against the poor people, against the homeless, and against those who are marginalized.
Yeah. Where do you think we're at here today in America in 2019 in terms of what Martin Luther King was fighting for and where we're at now? Do you think we're better off, worse off, or somewhere in between?
I think we've made incredible progress for enlightenment and for raising awareness and understanding of how we have to fight if we're ever going to make democracy a reality. And I think we have more visible biases now that feel empowered to be hateful and to be racist, classist, and sexist. At the same time, I am encouraged because more people are taking a stand and showing up to say that's not the country we want. It's dangerous now because we have seen far more brutality and in the name of beliefs and in the name of values. At the same time, I think we are at an incredible positive crossroad. Anytime people like you and me can stand in a place like this and talk about structural, institutional, interpersonal injustices.
What do you think? What's your hope?
My hope is that my grandchildren will take up the mantle that I've taken up for the last 40 years, and that education in schools, public, private, religious, will start to confront biases that are in policies, curriculum, assessment, practices, and in the minds and hearts of people in their homes, so that we can start to see the shift that he stood for and that this nation stands for. And I think that schooling is the last bastion of hope for a democracy.
Introduce yourself again.
Fontaine.
And where are we at today?
Where we at City Park.
And what's happening today?
That's the Martin Luther King March.
Okay.
Parade, I should say.
Parade.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they call it a parade?
Well, because it's not a parade and we're actually standing up for what Dr. Martin Luther King stood for.
So I've been shooting these events for many years now, actually, and I'm a big fan of who Martin Luther King was as a person and what he stood for.
Right.
And the civil rights, which we all know about.
Right.
I was surprised to find a lot of people were not aware of what he was doing the last few years of his life.
Right.
With the Poor People's Campaign, and he stood up against militarism and war, the Vietnam War, but militarism in general. And he got a lot of pushback, I know, from people. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that in terms of, the image of Martin Luther King.
It's being tarnished a lot, in my opinion. The image is being tarnished by a lot of politicians because Dr. Martin Luther King stood as a voice for the people that couldn't be heard. And politicians are heard all the time and they lie, and as soon as they get into the position of power, they forget what they stated that they were going to do. So I really don't trust too many politicians in any way, and like I said, I think they tarnished the memory of him.
Yeah. It seems like everybody, even George W. Bush was all about praising Martin Luther King, but there seems to be a disconnect. What do you think? Why do you think that is?
You want to try to appeal to as many people as possible for the vote. It's tell a lie. It's the most believable lie to as many people that believe it, saying that your agenda would be something, and then when you get in there, like I stated, then it's totally forgotten. It's just for the vote.
How many people do you think in the community believe that these politicians actually are anywhere near what they say they are in terms of...
A good 80%. They know it's just hogwash.
Yeah.
But we won't let anything stop for the support that you're coming out for in your own personal view.
Right. Do you know much about, the Beyond Vietnam speech and kind of what he was doing in the last years of his life?
Nah, really, the school education and it's more taught at the home, because the school is definitely not going to teach you that. So, but as far as in my family, no, we didn't really speak too much about the Vietnam thing. It was more of a discussion of how we got our civil rights and why he spoke for those that couldn't be heard for the civil rights.
Yeah. Well, you know what he was doing in Memphis, right? He was killed.
Yeah.
He was organizing the garbage workers, and he realized it was taking up the mantle of poverty.
Right.
And organizing the Poor People's Campaign, and it seems like that's been erased from history.
Oh yeah, well it's history. The best place to hide things is in the library. You have to read up on it to find out about it, and then the less that is spoken of, the more that is less known. The less that is spoken, the less it is known, and it's in a book, you have to read it to find out, but then who's willing to listen?
Do you think Martin Luther King was killed by the government?
I think they probably knew that he was going to be killed and they didn't do anything to intervene. They were following him, they were watching him. I'm quite sure that when somebody talking about killing a prominent figure, someone heard of it. I'm quite sure that with the informants, with the FBI and all of that, then I'm quite sure they knew who was going to try to attempt to kill him, but stopping it is just the same as pulling the trigger if you don't stop it.
What do you think about where we're at today in America in terms of, equality, poverty, racism? Where are we at today?
As an American, I'm fine. I mean, I don't really see too much. It's always going to exist, racism or whatever. But as far as having a bearing on my life or anything like that, I mean, if it comes, it comes, and and the sooner the better, and the sooner the better it goes, because it's not going to stop me.
So Michael Hancock was our mayor. Yeah, I liked his line, the best place to hide something is in the library. Thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, like people don't actually read. You know, I thought that was interesting. I will say too, and I had a little bit more of a conversation about his death, which, you know, I do believe that he was murdered by the CIA, or I think I'm not sure who all was involved with it, but if you're not familiar with the work of William Pepper, he's an attorney who's done a lot of work on the Martin Luther King, as well as the Sirhan situation. He played a role in helping with that. There was a civil trial that was actually Martin Luther King's family was involved with. I think it was in 1989, and they actually ended up exonerating who's the guy? I can't think of the guy's name that was in jail for killing King, but they actually found him not guilty, and so I thought that it's interesting to look up. And again, I don't think it's an accident that he gave his Beyond Vietnam speech and then was murdered 1 year to the day. I think that was deliberate. So I also have, let's see, here's some clips from 2020 that I took. That's Martin Luther King at the top there. And Gandhi and Rosa Parks. And I can't remember who's on the other side.
I don't think we missed anyone, but if we did, I'm going to get them now. I want to celebrate, of course, the Commissioner of Adams County, Steve Mauricio, who is here as well. Thank you for being here, Commissioner.
It's the politicians.
I want to thank, I see over here to my left, former State Senator Penfield Tate, former State Representative
and for some reason,
some of the folks whose shoulders we stand on.
For some reason, Michael Nutter was there, and who was the mayor of New York, the mayor of Philadelphia, quite a crooked politician. But for some reason, he was at this event speaking.
And once again, let's give a mile-high welcome to my dear friend all the way from Philadelphia, the former mayor of Philadelphia and former president of U.S. Conference of Mayors, Mike Nutter. First, we thank God for Dr. King and his contemporaries who walked the streets and marched and put it on the line so that a young man from 5 Points could someday dream to be mayor of Denver, Colorado. I'm inspired by the memory of Dr. King today, because Dr. King led by love. He didn't needlessly target vulnerable immigrants or members of the Muslim faith or members of the LGBTQ community. Dr. King led with love. I'm inspired by Dr. King today because he spoke out against hate. He did not have to try to stand on the shoulders of the vulnerable people of this country. And if we could tweet back then, I don't think Dr. King would tweet out hate. I'm inspired by Dr. King today because as I look at the children in this audience, they don't understand how valuable the opportunities that they have been given because of men and women who marched with Dr. King, put their lives on the line. I'm inspired by Dr. King today because I look out in the audience and I see Reverend Dr. James Peters, who marched with Dr. King, and Barbara Shannon Bannister, and Wilma Webb, and Wellington Webb. When I think about all the sacrifices that people have made so that we can stand here today with the audacity to believe and to accept the baton of freedom, but yet are hesitant to act. So today, here's my message today. As we leave this platform, let's march with a purpose. March for the 3-year-old who's in this audience today. March for the homeless man who's in City Park today. March for the single mom who's trying to figure it out today. March for the woman who is concerned about her job and afraid to speak up when she's been passed over time and time again for promotion. March with a purpose today. March against hatred and those who are in Virginia today, who are ready to march against law-abiding people, who want to keep people safe and want to speak for justice against those who will walk into places of faith and will fire indiscriminately into crowds of people who are seeking cover of God. March with a purpose today. Don't act like no one's done nothing for you. For today we all are here standing on the shoulders of giants. I don't need you to show up just to look good. Oh, you look good. But we've got some problems in America today. We got problems right here in Colorado today. We need to march with a purpose. Don't sit idly by, shake your hand and suck your teeth when we see racism happening in our community. Speak up. Be courageous. Put something on the line. When we see someone being mistreated or targeted unnecessarily, speak up. It doesn't help anybody to shake your hand and to suck your teeth. Speak up. I'm grateful today and inspired by Dr. King today because he stood in the gap for me. He stood in the gap for you. He didn't ask what color you were. No, he called on the ideals of this great nation. He used the words embedded in the Constitution of the United States, and he used the very values and ideas of Jesus Christ to lead this nation to be the greatest that it can be. We cannot any longer sit idly by while we see people being targeted, disrespected, dehumanized, while we see our nation begin to erode from the inside out. Folks, today, march with a purpose. Commit yourselves to a new idea that America must no longer forsake the ideas of Dr. King, that we must live up to a higher calling. We are the heirs of men and women who put it on the line. I will close with this. In that beautiful day in November of 2007, as I stood in that ballroom with my wife and children, and we stood and looked at that screen, and as CNN put up on that screen, CNN projects Barack Obama to be the next president of the United States of America. I don't ever remember in my life when I played football and had very violent collisions, losing consciousness. But I collapsed. And I had an uncontrollable cry. And later that night, my children asked me, "Daddy, why were you crying?" And I told them, at that moment, I thought about Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, Mr. Meredith. Thought about all the men and women who marched and bled for the right for me to be in that room, to have cast my ballot earlier that day. I thought about my 70-year-old mother who thought she'd never see that day. I thought about all the children who had been preyed upon and lost their lives because they had the courage to say, "I deserve to be in this classroom." Thought about all the people who prayed for this generation that they would never meet. I thought about the millions of slaves who toiled in the field, helped build this nation, helped build the White House and the Capitol that Barack would walk into. It was at that moment that I realized that we need to walk every day with a purpose. And it is only through the courage of men and women who put their own personal safety behind it. And to say, "Here am I, ready, willing, and prepared. Send me." Walk with a purpose. God bless you all, and happy King Day.
So, you know, political speech, but you know, he brings up Obama, and I remember when Obama was elected, I was at a theater, and I do remember like everyone was really teared up, and you know, it was very emotional. But I also had like a sinking feeling in my stomach because I knew that he had received more money from the banks than any of the other candidates, and I think that there's just there's such a misguided hope in these politicians, and clearly Barack Obama stood for everything that Martin Luther King was opposed to. And so you know, here we have, let me delete this, people keep posting nonsense on here. Remove, please, hide user from this channel. Anyway, so I just thought that was interesting to bring up Obama, and that's the problem with a lot of our activism is, you know, we're the people are seeking power within a corrupt system, and that's a problem. The quality on this is
standing
great.
in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and the Poor People's Campaign, and also representing missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. We're here because MLK Day has been co-opted by capitalism. We have sponsors here that are sponsoring the parade by AT&T, Chick-fil-A, Kaiser Permanente, companies that do not care about marginalized communities. And here they are sponsoring and making a profit based on a people's movement. Martin Luther King Jr. was not on the same team as the elites. He was on the people's team, and he stood for poor people, homeless people, and against class war and racism. So we're here to stand in solidarity with the rest of our brothers and sisters who want to make sure that resources go back to the people and not funding more wars across the world.
So one thing I'm interested in is how politicians will get up and talk about racism, as we should. Like, racism is a huge problem, but they ignore the economic things and how it seems like that's kind of a safe thing for politicians to talk about when there's like, I've always been inspired by the last couple of years, a few years of King's life where he was speaking against militarism and economic, poverty.
Well, you know, Tupac Shakur...
Hold on, let's turn this way a little bit.
You know, Tupac Shakur said it really well, is that we always have money for wars but can't feed the poor. And we were just able to sanction another $1 trillion to drop bombs on brown people worldwide that aren't hurting anybody here in America. And really, what it comes down to is all those resources could be used to have public bathrooms and have resources available for our unhoused brothers and sisters, and for them to have access to clean food and water. But instead, the military-industrial complex is sanctioning more and more war and more bloodshed instead of actually helping people and helping provide the basic needs that we have here at home and abroad as well.
What do you think about his image? I would interview a lot of people around here, and a lot of people have never even heard of Poor People's. I think now that more people have heard it, but like a few years ago, a lot of people hadn't even heard of Poor People's Campaign or even knew about the last part of his life. So what do you think about how his image is used in the media by corporations or by politicians or what?
I mean, I think it's an absolute disgrace, but it's nothing that's not new to be able to piggyback off of the next movement and the next wave of energy, to be able to use that and kind of contort it for their own self-interest and seem like they're actually representing something that they're not. So in order to...
So she just, the other woman there held up a sign for Poor People's Campaign, and that's the Poor People's Campaign that I was talking about earlier. That's funded by the Ford Foundation, and is really about managing. It's a front group, and it's not legit in my opinion. But anyways, I thought I'd mention that.
Combat that is just by raising awareness and knowing that Martin Luther King Jr. wouldn't be standing for corporate power, for corporate agendas at all. He would be here with the people. He would be out on the Capitol every night with these people that are having their property stolen and their homes swept, and the only thing that's keeping them alive taken from them and thrown into a dumpster by the Denver police. And that also just ties into police brutality, and the reason why we're talking about people like Elijah McClain and every other name that's been out there that's been killed by police brutality for doing nothing besides existing while being black.
What brought you? Why do you care?
I care because we're all one, and I'm not trying to write off the piggyback of all lives matter, because yes they do, but we're here to see that Black lives matter, because those are the lives that they're most targeted. And I care because those are my people. Black and Indigenous people, we're all the same. All people are the same, but the Black and Indigenous struggle has been so parallel. The land here was stolen from Indigenous people and built on the backs of Black and Indigenous people. This whole country was built because of slavery and because of underpaid workers and because of the people that were coming up from Mexico. This used to be Mexico. The border, we didn't cross the border crossed us. So I need to stand in solidarity with all my brothers and sisters, regardless if they're from Africa, if they're from the Caribbean, if they're from South America, anywhere in the world. We're all here to represent the general population of people that don't have access to the same resources that the elite do.
And then lastly, what do you think about nonprofits and what the role they play in all of this? Do you think they're making things, that they're bringing us forward, or do you think there's maybe some problems there?
There's both. There's definitely both. There's nonprofits that are sticking by their word, and one of the nonprofits that I stand by and I support are Her Many Voices Foundation, and they are a good example of people that are going out into the world and properly using the funds that they're receiving to put food in the mouths of people that really need it, to build sustainable housing for people that need it. And I can't really speak to a lot of other organizations because I know that the misappropriation of funds does exist. And there is a lot of issues within the nonprofit community around them not properly using and redistributing what they're receiving for the work that they're doing. But that's, it's a very general statement, so I can't speak for every nonprofit. I think there's people that are doing good and then people that could use some improvement and some change as well.
Do you have anything to say on this?
I'm just so proud of you. Yeah, I was really raised by activism in the way of my mother taking me to board meetings for things like anti-genocide, for pro-native rights, introducing me to a new refugee population that's huge here in Denver, Colorado, and not just providing what we think that they should have or they should want or they should need, but having the conversation. What do you need? What services would you like? And then using our resources, using our voice, using our connections and network to really provide for the people. So we need to talk about genocide. We need to talk about how Hitler was so inspired by the Americans and what they did to our first indigenous people, that he emulated his labor in concentration camps after what we've done here. So genocide is not over. It continues today, and it's fueled by corporations. It's funded by corporations. So every time you put your penny in someone's pocket that they're going to war, like Chick-fil-A, like Kaiser Permanente, like AT&T, like Coors, I'm calling you out, and so is the youth. We're calling you out right now. So we need to take those funds, we need to take those resources, and we need to have a new constitution full of equality for the real people, not just for the elite 1% that will soon become 0.%. But we are taking our future in our own hands. We are shaping the minds of the youth, and we're coming for you. Look out.
And what do you think Martin Luther King's favorite grandma potato chip would be? That'd be good.
Yeah.
I was here.
If Martin Luther were here, if Martin Luther King Jr. were here today, I think he would say he would echo the words of the youth right now of Greta. How dare you? How dare you do this in my name? I really think that he would see the solidarity and the camaraderie here, but I also know that he would be pointing the finger right back at us. Right back at us.
And a lot of our city council, Mayor Hancock, doesn't care about poor people. He cares about the developers, and he cares about the people that are lining his pockets. So the fact that they're using MLK's name while they're still stealing property from people that are the most vulnerable. We've had over 100 people pass away because of extreme weather conditions, because of them being houseless. And that's just absolutely unacceptable.
So, yeah, there's a lot there. You know, I come from, you know, really having, you know, I come from like the activist community, and I care about the same issues that these young women care about. Greta, someone brought up Greta, and that's, again, these things get co-opted, whether it's Black Lives Matter or, you know, Greta Thunberg. You know, for some reason, people have a hard time being critical of some of these nonprofits and these groups that present themselves as being the solution, and so that's the challenge that I've had, you know, over the years, and particularly the last couple of years, is like I totally support the cause of the grassroots part of Black Lives Matter. For example, we do have a serious problem with police brutality and even racism in the police, you know, structural racism. But the Black Lives Matter organization, which I think received like $1 billion from, I can't remember who it was it Nike? Anyways, or I can't remember now. Maybe you guys can on the comment remind me. But yeah, you have these large organizations, and Greta Thunberg, you know, total, you know, fraud, really. How dare you? But yeah, so that's the challenge that I've had, is people are like, you know, you go to a Black Lives Matter rally and you talk to people, and you know, they care about these issues, and they are important issues. So we shouldn't throw out the issue. We should work to deal with that issue, but also recognize that these movements, like the Poor People's Campaign or Black Lives Matter, or a lot of the what's the climate crisis? It's got the hourglass thing, but these are actually, at the end of the day, corporate run and driven. You know, it's the new stakeholder ESG capitalism that they're putting online, which doesn't care about the environment. It doesn't care about Black lives. It doesn't care about poverty. It doesn't care about people who are victims of war. And so that's the challenge, you know, that I've had, and you know, trying to, like these young women, I agree with what they're concerned about. I don't necessarily agree with, you know, some of the organizations or maybe some of the solutions that they may support, but anyways, so, yeah. So with that, I've got a little bit more footage here, which we can talk while I'm playing the footage, because it's just it's basically just some footage of let me see here. So anyways, I appreciate you guys joining me. I just kind of wanted, this was kind of a quick impromptu thing, and I just wanted to kind of share some of this, and I think these conversations need to happen more, and the co-optation of different so-called you know, I don't know what I'm talking about, but anyways, I'm spent. But yeah, this is actually from 2019, and yeah, pretty large turnout at these things. So this is 18 minutes long. I'll just kind of skip through it so you can just get a kind of a feel for the Denver Maraud. And the frustrating thing for me is just that there are a lot of people who genuinely care and genuinely want to make the world a better place. We just get duped, you know. We get duped. Skip through this here.
Mom, you want to walk? Can you walk for a few minutes like Robbie said?
And regarding marches, you know, I remember attending in 2003, there was these massive protests against the war. And I remember attending them and being so inspired and thinking, oh, wow, look at all these people coming out, and, you know, naively thinking that we could actually have an influence. And I mean, in reality, it's meaningless. You know, it's good to connect with people, you know, good to see other people and have conversations and know that you're not alone. But like, we didn't stop the war. We didn't accomplish any of our goals with those. And then every year I would go to the anti-war protest, March 20th. And it just became less and less people. And it got to the point where actually going to the marches and demonstrations was actually depressing. I was actually depressed. I'd be walking around in a daze, just being depressed about the situation. So, I mean, I think we need to, let me turn this down a little bit. I think we need to change our tactics and change our thinking, like radically change what we do and how we think about these, both the issues, the problems, and the solutions, and also looking who we're looking up to. You know, all these different nonprofits and politicians are seriously problematic, and the Martin Luther King Day thing is a good example of that. There we go. That's pretty much it. I just wanted to share some clips and just say some things that have been on my mind, and I appreciate you guys joining me, and hopefully we can keep having this conversation. By the way, if in case you haven't noticed, I have finally left Facebook. It's official. I'm no longer on Facebook or Twitter, actually. So now I'm in the process of figuring out. I will reach out to some people that I've gotten contact information from, and coming up with a new strategy for communicating, because I'm actually going to make a video about my leaving Facebook and kind of the logic there. I mean, these spaces are controlled. And I think that we need to put our energy into different spaces. But anyway, much love, everyone. Thank you guys for joining me. And yeah, thank you so much.